Today we'll be discussing how things in an ecosystem get energy. And that's really our goal, is understanding where the energy originates from and how it gets passed from one organism to another. And so there are these simple tools that we use to help display the feeding relationships in an ecosystem. And so the most simple version of it is called a food chain, where there's just a series of relationships that shows how energy is transferred from one organism to the other, right? Something eats a plant, something eats that something, and so on. Next, we have food webs, which are a more complex interaction, series of interactions where you see everything in that ecosystem and what it eats and what eats it. And here's an example of what a food web looks like, right? You have, let's just say there's plants in an ecosystem. The deer eats the plants, so the raccoons, the alligator eats the raccoon, and then there's a vulture at the top here that eats the dead alligator, and so on. This is a complex series of interactions, and this is a food web. We can do a lot of things with a food web. You can identify what type of consumer it is. If we're looking like a primary consumer, also known as a herbivore, is in like light green here. These are things that eat the plants. Primary producers are in orange. A scavenger usually kind of goes at the top because it eats everything that dies. There's decomposers in a food web and so on, right? This shows the complex reactions that take place within an ecosystem. So the whole goal of these notes is to understand what happens to energy as it makes its way through an ecosystem. Energy in the ecosystem starts from sun coming to Earth. Sun coming into Earth provides the energy for producers to make their own energy. And then you have things that eat those producers. Those are called herbivores or primary consumers. Things that eat those things and so on. And at each level of eating and feeding, some of that energy is passed on from one organism to the next. A key cog in that chain there are decomposers, because decomposers recycle the dead material in an ecosystem that then the primary producers use to build back things up. Think about what happens in soil, right? There's bacteria, there are worms, there are bugs, there are fungi. Their main job is decomposition, and what they do is they break down dead and dying material and return those nutrients to the soil. If those nutrients are in the soil, then primary producers can use those nutrients to build up and make themselves. So you have to understand then this pyramid of energy. And so let's talk about what happens in the pyramid of energy here and why a certain amount of energy only gets passed on from one level to the next, right? So the sun comes in, primary producers make all of the energy for an ecosystem. Those are things like photosynthesizers, chemosynthesizers, and so on, right? They're making their own energy, so they provide the energy for the ecosystem. And then anything that eats a primary producer is called a first level consumer or a primary consumer. And they can receive up to 10% of the energy that the primary producer made. And then the next level can receive up to 10% of that, which is 1% of the total energy. The next level can receive 10% of that, which is again 0.1% of the total energy that the primary producers made. And so energy available at each level, and these are called trophic levels, at each trophic level decreases the higher you go up. And there's reasons for that. If you eat a plant, you're getting only part of the energy that plant produces, because that plant uses that energy itself, right? It uses its energy to build up its body. It uses its energy to store sugars. It uses its energy not in plants, but some things use the energy to make heat. Some of it is used for, it's just lost as waste to the environment. And so all of those things combined help to account for that 90% of energy that's lost. But it's not really lost because energy is never created or destroyed. It just takes a different form. So if I try to reframe this for you, so I make sure you're getting this whole part here, because this is the key part of this section. If I have something, if I'm looking at an ecosystem and I see that there's plants in an ecosystem and there's an animal that eats those plants. Let's just say hypothetically we're looking at a normal forest ecosystem and there are plants and there's like insects that eat the plants. The insects that eat the plants can basically get about 10% of that total energy that that plant produced. If something eats that insect, let's say a bird comes along and eats the insect, it can only get 10% of that energy that the insect had from eating the plant. It only gets 10% of that energy because that insect used the energy to build up its own body, to move around, do things on a daily basis, and it lost some to waste because not every single form of energy is digestible there. It also works similarly if we look at biomass or pyramids of numbers. Biomass is just the physical mass of all the living things in an ecosystem. Right? So if you took all of the plants in an ecosystem and weighed them, they would make up the majority of an ecosystem. And then you weigh all of the things that eat the plants, they make up a smaller percentage and smaller percentage and smaller percentage all the way up. Pyramid of numbers works the same way. Let's just count the plants, count the things that eat the plants, count the things that eat those things, and so on. And generally what you see is this rule stays true the whole way, whether we're looking at a trophic level pyramid, where we're looking at the energy transferring up, whether we're looking at a biomass pyramid or a pyramid of numbers. There's a 10% rule. There's only about 10% that transfers its way up. So if we compare to what we just talked about, right, this would be 100%, 10%, 1%, 0.1%, and so on. And so leaving these notes, you should understand what the main source of energy in an ecosystem is, and understand how that energy transfers through an ecosystem. It's not 100% transfer. You don't get all of the energy from that thing. It's 10%, give or take, depending on different animals and so on. And that's why energy has to constantly be created in an ecosystem. Why, if you took away the plants in that ecosystem, then that ecosystem would collapse because there's nothing else to make the energy necessary to sustain all of the life in that ecosystem. So thank you for watching.